welcome everyone to this wonderful opportunity to interact and engage with a world-renowned politician, international diplomat, author of some 24 books, and a public intellectual, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor has been serving as a Member of Parliament for Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, since 2009, being thrice elected by popular vote. I consider it a singular honor to be able to host this event and to thank Dr. Tharoor for joining us today, given his packed schedule. As you all know, Dr. Tharoor is a well-known expert in global diplomacy, and his writings and teachings on India's evolving role in global diplomacy is worthy for any student or politician to study. His experience when serving as Under Secretary General of the United Nations and his personal contributions to diplomacy and peacekeeping missions globally are remarkable, notably leading the UN team in the former Yugoslavia. Shashi Tharoor always highlights the rich cultural diversity and unity of India and champions the country's pluralistic society, promoting inclusivity, communal harmony, and peaceful coexistence between diverse communities as integral values. He shines as a beacon of light in South Asian politics, in this regard, amongst others. He is well known for articulating India's remarkable progress in various sectors, including science and technology, healthcare and education, while simultaneously addressing the existing challenges of poverty, inequality, and infrastructure development. His speeches and writings on all these aspects at multiple fora in India and elsewhere are indeed a repository of valuable information for any student. As a champion for empowering the youth through education, skill development, and leadership opportunities, he often emphasizes the pivotal role of the younger generation in shaping the future of India and the world. Dr. Tharoor's accomplishments as Minister of Human Resource Development some years ago are well known. Dr. Tharoor often highlights the urgent need for sustainable development and climate action, emphasizing India's commitment to renewable energy, conservation efforts, and its role in international environmental agreements. He is well known for his command of and eloquence in the use of English language, and for creating new words which sometimes gets included in dictionaries and thesauruses. So much so that Tharoorasaurus is a book written by Shashi Tharoor, which was published on 1st September 2020 by Penguin Random House. He always emphasizes the power of language and communication in shaping national and global narratives, and the importance of multilingualism, cultural exchange, and effective communication in the contemporary world. Shashi Tharoor was one of the first politicians to use social media to directly reach constituents, and he's famous for having the highest followers on Twitter until he was overtaken by Narendra Modi, His Excellency the Prime Minister. Imprudent decision making and policy missteps have led to economic bankruptcy of our motherland. It has resulted in economic catastrophe and economic Armageddon. Its impact on the lives of the people have been tectonic and detrimental. Our unique situation in our country requires out-of-the-box solutions and novel policy resultants. I fervently believe that the presence of His Excellency Shashi Tharoor, more so his innovative ideas, views, opinions, and proposals, will certainly add to the vast amount of knowledge that is much needed in order to find unique prescriptions to the various challenges that we face in our country. So let me once again thank Dr. Tharoor, whom I have met several years ago in one of the major financial forums, and we are all very happy to have you in your capacity as a global intellectual who has championed people-based, humanistic modernization and development. Over to you.
Johnson used to say, I think my late father would have been proud of, but only my mother would have believed. Thank you very much, nonetheless, for those very kind words. I think the idea was that I should say a few words to you on global governance, but I would rather open it up really to an interaction, so I'll be very brief. I think what's far more useful, perhaps for all of us, is for me to address what's of interest to you rather than pontificating. So I'll try and be fairly brief. I mean, yesterday I had the privilege of delivering the Sunita Jayawardene oration at the University of Colombo. They were very interested in what the BRICS expansion meant. But I took the opportunity to also think a little bit about global governance, which is this phrase that we keep hearing in the international system with great frequency. But rather like the British talking about the weather, it's something that everyone mentions and no one does anything about it. So we've got this system that was settled in 1945 with the end of the Second World War. People talk about the liberal world order, the rules-based world order, various other such phrases, but ultimately it's a system which has both worked and not worked. It's worked reasonably well. It's prevented the Third World War. It created conditions for decolonization and development. All of those things happened. But at the same time, wars continued elsewhere, including in your country and in mine and so on. The wars were pushed away from Europe and America into the global periphery. But it was not as if a magic era of peace descended because of the New World Order, because of the Old World Order, I beg your pardon. With the end of the Cold War, we had something called the unipolar moment, when there was only one superpower, and it pretty much could have its way in the global system. And now we're seeing the emergence of a new pattern. It's a complicated one. My own preferred metaphor is to link the shape of world order today very much to the internet. That is, that we're all networked as we are on the internet, on the World Wide Web. But I may be connected to him and he may be connected to you, but I may not be connected to you. And I'm referring to countries in this particular case, simply because we each have different interests. But what's interesting is that the old binaries of the Cold War are over. It's no longer black and white, communist, non-communist, whatever. It's now much more complicated across the board. And you're seeing new patterns emerging, and they haven't yet settled into anything very clearly as a shape. I've mentioned this before, but we have an interesting example in India's own pattern of relationships in what one might call minilaterals, plurilateral organizations that are subsets of world order in their own region. So the Indian foreign minister meets every year with his Russian and Chinese counterparts in something called RIC. And of course, they have the Brazilians and the South Africans, and they have BRICS. And now they're going to have 6 more members there from next year. Then they subtract the Russians but keep the Chinese, and they have BASIC for environmental negotiations. And then they subtract the Chinese also, and they have IPSA for South-South cooperation. And I mentioned this, India is a member of all of them, finds its uses in all of them, and not merely because its name begins with that indispensable element in any acronym, a vowel, Without the eye of India, these things would all be unpronounceable. But also because, obviously, it has something to contribute to each formation, something to gain from it. And this kind of pattern, I think, is replicated by many countries in many different ways. We're also looking at a situation where the emerging pattern appears to be neither quite bipolar nor quite multipolar. There is a layer at the top of an emerging bipolarity between the US and China, which we cannot escape. They're both competing for the distinction of being the largest economy in the world, and they're both certainly countries which can exercise considerable heft in and beyond their own regions. But there is a next level that you can call multipolar, a number of powers that are fairly significant in their own regions that could even serve in some ways to offset or counterbalance the bipolar superpowers, and that have a certain amount of influence on the global system. And those would include Britain, France, Russia to some degree, which has declined from the top tier, India in its own region. Whether Brazil and South Africa would yet qualify remain to be seen. Nigeria, arguably, in West Africa has such a role. And these are all patterns we have to look at and see because they're still emerging. Strictly speaking, the most interesting feature of all of this is that whereas if you look at the beginning of the 20th century, the rising powers of that time had to challenge and chose to challenge the existing world order because they had no place in it. Most of those rising today are not interested in overturning the world order. They're interested in reforming it or redesigning it or seeing it redesigned in a way that they too can have an influential voice. As I've remarked in the past, in world order issues, essentially, you're either at the table or on the menu. And if you don't want to be fodder for the big ones who are at the table, you want a place at the table yourself. And the reluctance of those at the table to make room, elbow room for the others, that is the real challenge. So I think the situation is coming is becoming somewhat more confused, and yet clarity will have to eventually dawn. Some of the dramas we're seeing on the international stage today, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its consequences, which have been global, the Israel-Gaza war, whose consequences have not yet been global, but whose very emotional reactions that have been triggered to it have been global. And I think we're looking at potentially, if all of these things keep persisting, growing, and connecting with each other, we're again looking at the possibility of a global cataclysm. So we have to watch all this with great care and concern. In my own estimate, neither situation is impossible to pull back from the brink, but both together and with the possibility of further expansion could yet ignite something that may make us put all thoughts of world order aside and worry about a true world disorder. I'll stop there. That's just by way of some ice-breaking remarks, and then anything that's on your mind, whether it's what I talked about or anything else you feel I might be able to address, I'll be happy to speak to.